Thank you for coming to my presentation. I hope you find it informative and helpful. You can take notes if you'd like, but I try and build my slides so that when you go back later and you get the slides off of the website, you can look through them and all of the most useful information will already be there. So feel free to take notes, but you'll find that my slides are meant to be informative and useful after this activity. So again, thank you all for coming. We're going to talk about business email compromise or executive fraud. Goes by a lot of names. It's basically using an email to acquire funds illegitimately directly from a company. So the way it works, basically, it's this very simple concept. The attacker pretends to be someone that the company, an individual at the company, would expect to trust. It could be a business partner, could be your customer, could be an executive that they would expect to be able to trust when they get an email. So they want to try and help out when they get these requests. And the emails are intended to convince the victim that they need, by helping, what they need to do to help is to send money. And this makes business email compromise unique from other types of IT attacks. So normally when we think about my company's under attack from say a hacking group, right? What they're after typically is personally identifiable information, credit cards, medical records, perhaps intellectual property. All of those things are things that may financially impact you at some point in the future. If you fall victim to business email compromise, you are impacted right now. It's not about you're going to lose money a year from now, 3 years from now, 5 years from now because your intellectual property got lost. You're going to lose money today because someone in your company just sent money to the attacker and it's gone. When people talk about business email compromise, normally what they're thinking about is what happens when my company is attacked, right? So when I get one of these fraudulent emails in and it's requesting money be transferred, how do I defend against it? The other thing that you need to be thinking about is what happens if I'm the impersonated party, right? What if it's your business partner who got the email and your company was the one they were pretending to be, right? So when that happens, your business partner is going to call you up, potentially, depending on their level of maturity in their own security program, or if they have one, and say, we wired the money to you. Why did you send us another bill? Right? You need to be able to respond to that. So as part of that, one of the things I'm going to talk to you about, or I'm going to mention, is engage both your legal department and also your marketing group or whoever it is that is the primary contact for your business partners, and make sure they're aware of this situation so that when that call comes, if it comes, you're ready to respond to it. Right? So I've had that happen to me already. I work in the aviation industry. There was a large targeted attack against the aviation industry last year, and we had over 100 of our business partners contact us in a 3-week period saying, hey, we've already paid money, why are you re-invoicing us, blah, blah, blah. So we had a response after response. I mean, it was just ongoing for weeks of this. So be prepared for that. So what are the ways that people are going to come after you with a business email compromise? In all the ones I've been looking at a lot of these. I would sum them up differently than some government agencies or other groups who have published works on business email compromise. I sum them up based on what I've really seen, and it comes down to these 4 things, right? Your supplier will contact you and say, we've changed banks. We don't like our bank anymore for whatever reason, or we got a better deal. We're changing banks. And so here's our new banking information. For all future payments, send it over here, right? So that sounds pretty simple, and you'd think companies would have a check for that, right? But it's amazing how many companies have not had a check for that. Fraudulent invoicing. So this is where they simply send you an invoice that pretends like, hey, you owe us money. And it might not be a business partner. In some cases, we've seen this be government agency impersonation, where it's a tax department or a government auditing department or whatever, where they send you a note saying, hey, you're behind, or your last payment was not correct. Please send us this additional money. Executive transaction fraud or request, that can come from an executive or a corporate attorney. And typically what they're doing is they're going to say, we're in the middle of a business transaction that requires immediate and private transactions, funds to be transferred, right? So we're in the middle of acquiring another company. You can't tell anybody because this could affect stock prices if it was known. So keep it to yourself, and we need the money today because we're handling the transaction today. And I'm going to show you an example of this where this happened with our company. And it was a really good example because they were very diligent. It wasn't just emails. It wasn't just a single person. It was an entire process they went through to try and get money out of us. And the other is executive data requests. This is becoming more common. This is a way of, it's not a direct funds request, but this is becoming more and more common where rather than take the time to find a vulnerability and hack into your system or try and get into your end user device and compromise their system and get to the PII, why not just send an email to somebody who has all that information and say, I'm the president of the company and I need this because I'm responding to a corporate audit. Send it to me now, right? And of course they're going to want to help and they're going to send it to the corporate, they're going to send it to the executive, whether it's the chief financial officer or the CEO, because who wants to tell the CEO no? And then all that information's gone in one email, right? And lots of companies, hundreds of companies fall victim to this every year. So why is this important? Again, it's direct financial loss. This is not just a small piece of the I hate the word hacking, but of the cybercrime industry. This is a huge piece of cybercrime. Why? Because it's effective and it is a business. I mean, how many businesses in here are grossing over $1 billion a year, right? That's a fairly significant sized company, right? These guys are doing that. In 18 months, $1.5 billion of reported losses. Right? So that's only the losses that were reported to government agencies or central cybercrime gathering groups that gather statistics on this. So how many of your companies, if you fell victim to this, would actually report? You don't have to raise your hand. But I'm just saying, a lot of companies would not choose to report that they lost $1 million because someone sent them a bogus email. Right? So if we're talking about $1.5 billion in 18 months and $3 billion in 3 years, I suspect that that's a small fraction of what companies have actually lost in the last 3 years, right? So this is a huge industry. And it's much simpler. If you can just send someone an email and get them to just send you money, that's way easier than, okay, I got to compromise their endpoint, I've got to escalate my privileges, I've got to get domain credentials, I've got to find the database, break into the database, extract the PII, get onto the black market, find someone who will buy it for pennies on the dollar, and be done, and then make my money, right? If I can just send you one email and you'll say, oh, sure, here's some money, that's so much easier. Why wouldn't you do that? So what happens most of the time? Now, attacking in business email compromise varies significantly from people who basically do nothing to do reconnaissance. They just send an email with very little information, hoping you'll fall for it, to people who've done significant reconnaissance. Reconnaissance in business email compromise is different than a pen test, or a penetration activity. If someone's trying to penetrate your network, they're going to be looking at what type of operating systems you run, what type of software, custom software, commercial software are you patching, what does your footprint on the internet look like, where are your potential weaknesses, who are your partners. Those are the kind of things you're going to look like when you're doing a technical compromise. But this is a business process compromise. So what an attacker's looking at during a reconnaissance activity is different, right? They want to understand what your company does. What are its business processes? Who are your partners? Who are your customers? Who are people you pay? And who are people that pay you, right? How are those financial things conducted? They want to collect information about your organizational structure. Who's the CFO? Who's the CEO? Who's the head of your legal department? Because those are people that if I can get you to believe the emails from them, you're going to trust or fear, one of the two, and send what they ask for. They're going to look for particularly interesting targets. Like, they're not going to send an email saying, wire money to me because I'm conducting this significant venture acquisition of this company. They're not going to send that to a guy in your IT department, right? Because he's going to get that email going, well, I can't do anything with this, right? They're going to send it to your finance department. And not only that, they're going to try and find out exactly who would be the person to process that. And if you've published something on your website that says, oh, we just hired someone in our new finance department, they're joining the team, they're going to target that person. Why? Because they don't know your business processes and policies, but they might already have the authority. And how do they find out about your company? So from this perspective, it's not a lot different than a technical attack, right? If I'm going to come in and try and breach your systems or breach your endpoints, I'm going to gather information about your business. But it is a little bit different, again, because this is not meant to gather information to support that technical attack. It's really about your business process. So they're going to look at your website. They're going to go to your Facebook account. Now, you do see instances where malware is used as part of one of these attacks, but I would say that that's not the most common mechanism, mostly because it's not necessary, and it also stands a chance of being detected, which could throw the whole attack process off, right? So there are other ways of going about this that don't require that, but we do see it. It's just not as common. So I'm going to talk about it a little bit, how they'll target your end users with malware, usually email-based malware. They're going to go to your LinkedIn. We've seen several cases where they will call the company as a business partner. They'll make a phone call, not just be email. Part of their reconnaissance will be they'll get on the phone, and if they don't know who to call, they'll just call the front desk. They'll call reception. They're like, hey, I need to talk to someone in your finance department. We had a problem with billing. Who would I need to talk to? I've got all the email addresses. I just need the name so I can get the right person, right? So, of course, they're going to help, and they're going to get information that way. They're going to look in the news. Does the news talk about any of the people who are involved with these, or who your business partners are, or interesting transactions that they could leverage as part of this con, because that's what it is. And they also use, I use the term dragnet phishing, which has never shown up anywhere, so you guys can either use that or say that was the stupidest thing I saw at the conference. But what dragnet phishing is, it's when you're phishing for stuff that is not the end target, right? I'm going to send emails to people to gather information that I can use later. Right? So I'm sending a lot of information. I'm sending maybe information to the HR department. I maybe send information to an IT department. I'm sending information just not because I'm trying to compromise them at that point. All I'm trying to do is get a response from them. And some of the information I'm trying to gather, it may be just to validate, for instance, what's the naming convention of your email accounts? Is it first letter, last name? Is it first name dot last name? How do you structure that? How do your signature blocks look? Are they standardized? Is there a logo? Right? So you get somebody to interact with you so you can start seeing what the email from the company looks like and how people at the company communicate. Right? Next. So now they've got information and they're going to want to do something with that information. So what do they want to do? If they want to come after you, they've got to figure out where do they launch their attack from, okay? So they could create an email spoofing app or use a service. We'll talk about that in just a minute. That services are out there now. You can rent a spoof to send emails. Very handy. And if you're going to do that, they're going to set up, if they're going to do their own email spoofing, they're going to set up a domain somewhere. And there's some reasons why they would do it in certain locations. And I'm going to talk about that a little later because it makes it harder to block them if they do it in certain places. They also might acquire a lookalike domain. And I'm going to show you some examples of that. That's actually very, very common if somebody's taking the time to really target your company. They've put together an entire process, right? They've kind of come up with a business plan for how they're going to extract money from your company. They'll usually acquire a lookalike domain because if they can, at some point, they're hoping to interact with you. It's not just a one-shot deal. They're not just going to send you an email and it's done. They're typically going to send you an email with the hope that you're going to respond. And what happens is you get a conversation going, and that conversation may turn into an email back and forth. Oh, yeah, here's the information. Please send. I'll verify once I've gotten the money. And it may turn into phone calls. Hey, I want to call you. Make sure that you've got the right information. Anyway, so they'll start a conversation. Well, if you're going to reply to them in their email and they're spoofing your CEO, obviously you can't reply to your CEO with email, right? They're going to change that up so that you're replying to them, but it looks enough like you're replying to your CEO that you don't catch on. Finally, there is the possibility, and occasionally we do see it happen, where we see an actual compromise of an endpoint, and in those cases, the email isn't spoofed. It's really coming from the place that says it's coming from. It's just not coming from the people you think it's coming from. So in one case, we've had 2 or 3 of our business partners who were breached, and their email system was used to send email to us to try and extract money. Well, because it was a legitimate partner that we do business with on a regular basis, it went right past our filters, right? Because we had their domain whitelisted as an approved email sender for us. So they got in, they made a request, and the problem was they were in control of the email account. So we caught it before it turned into anything, but it was a lot harder because it got through a lot of our defenses. And so when you get an actual breach involved, it does make detection harder. That's something to keep in mind. And one of the things we did is once we realized, we'd take a look at the email headers. This is where if you haven't done a lot of email header analysis, and unless you're a forensic investigator or a government agency, someone involved in investigations, you might not do a lot of email analysis. There was a webinar I did last week on forensic analysis of email headers. Talks about what you need to look for, what information you can gather by looking at email headers, because it's useful. It helps you understand if, hey, my partner might have been breached. I probably need to call them and say, hey, it looks like somebody's really fraudulently sending email from your domain. So what happens if they get a lookalike domain? So lookalike domains are very common, and some of these are hard to spot. The longer your domain name is, the easier it is for me to put something in there that is going to get missed, right? So here's a great example. Abacus Property in Australia, fairly large company, right? If I take out the R, how many people would notice that, right? Are you paying that much attention to the address on the email that you would catch that? Or what about this? This is a common one. This is probably, in Singapore, this is probably one that people should pay attention to. Substituting a Q for a G is the most hard to detect substitution you can have in a URL or an email address. It looks so close that almost nobody will catch that. I'm actually going to show you an example of Singapore domain ownership in just a second. Using dashes, this shows up a lot, right? Where they actually use the correct words and the correct name, they just put a dash in there, right? So it depends on how well your users are paying attention to who they're sending the email to. And the other is, they'll do stuff like with the end of the domain, right? Instead of .com, they'll use .co, which is Colombia's national domain registry, right? So they'll say .co. Now you'd think that this is something people would catch, and a lot of time they do, but it's close enough. And if you've gone out and talked to a lot of your users, you are all IT people. Not only that, most of you are probably IT security savvy. Most of your end users know how to do what they have to do for their job on their computer, and that's probably about as far as it goes. Unless they're in their 20s, and then they know a lot about social activities. They know a lot about Twitter and Facebook and how to get on there, and they know nothing about security because they'll share their entire life on their social media. Okay, so let's take a look at Singapore.air. If we take a look at Singapore.air, this is the actual Singapore.air registry. So if you go out to Whois and you look up their registry, you can see who owns that. You can see how long they've owned it. They've owned it for a long time, 1995, domain register, and the organization is Singapore Airlines Limited. If you go out to Singapore Air with the Q instead of the G, you can see that this is registered through 2 cows and that the registrant name is Vistaprint Technologies. Right? Vistaprint, I would go as far as to call Vistaprint notorious for hosting scamming domains. If I see somebody who's put a lot of effort into setting up a fraudulent domain, Vistaprint is a Canadian company. They allow a free 30-day domain. Any domain you want, you can get for free for 30 days, and they have low cost hosting. And so I see Vistaprint show up on a lot of very targeted email compromise schemes. So just something to keep aware of. So the other thing that's interesting is this particular domain, SingaporeAir.com, is offline. So if it weren't, I would make note of that here. I don't know if anyone from Singapore Air happens to be in the room, but that domain's offline. The fact that it is offline makes me suspect that at some point there may have been an incident related to this domain, and Singapore Air took action to get that domain taken down. Just guessing. SharpMail. This is an example of spoofing as a service, right? So you don't want to go to all that trouble of scripting up your own solution to modify email headers and create a custom email, or you don't want to have to get into building your own packets. You want to stay simple. Well, SharpMail offers that to you. You can go to SharpMail, you can register with them, you can spoof most of the header fields. I'm trying to figure, now they advertise that there's legitimate business purposes or legitimate individual purposes for this, and I'm sure that that's probably, okay, mostly not true. It's mostly a lie. But I think there are probably cases. Anyway, so you see this come up a lot. And with tools like that, you can legitimately send an email pretending to be anybody. Oh my gosh, who is that? Oh, look at that. The Prime Minister of India thought I wished me good luck on this talk. How nice is that? I didn't even know he knew me. And if you look at the email headers, oh my gosh, look, it's right. It's from India.gov. It's from .gov.in. It's actually from him. That's awesome, right? So that's convenient because there's a difference between what a user sees. Oh, sorry, a little wild there. I hit the wrong button. There's a difference between what a user sees in the from field. And in this particular case, the header fields are all actually, if I replied to this email message, it would have went back to him and he would have went, what is this guy? How did he get this email? Who sent this? Right? But so that probably wouldn't have gone over very well because then I would have gotten a phone call and it would have been pleasant. But a lot of cases, what happens is they change out some of the values. And I'll talk about why that happens. So in the email header structure, there's a field for to, like who's this email going to. There's like who is this email coming from. There's a from field. But there's also a field called reply to. And reply to will override the from field if it's in the header. So that's why you can have an email that looks like it's from one person. It may legitimately have your CEO's email address in the from field that the user sees. And then as soon as they click reply to, the reply to will go to a different place. And the reason is because the reply to header overwrites a from header. It overrules it, right? So if those values are different, it'll go to the reply to address. And in this case, this is a good example. We've seen several cases of this where what they did is like, here's the legitimate sender, right? This is the real address. They sent it there in the email message. That's what the person saw. As soon as they hit reply, this is the email address that showed up, right? And mail.com, another very common place to see these go to. People register these domains, mail.com, and they set up a recipient email address. It's very easy to do. I wouldn't say that their intent is to be bad. I just think they facilitate it through the way they've established their business. So, and what they'll do is they'll change the naming convention. So in this particular case, it's brett@cogswellcogs.com. They'll put brett.cogswellcogs@mail. So they're hoping that when someone hits reply to, because it looked like a trusted sender in the original message, that they don't pay attention or don't pay close attention to who that reply went to. SMTP relays. If you have an open relay, the challenge with open relays is it obfuscates, at least for the last hop, where an email came from, right? And that can allow people to do things like bypass certain types of email security controls you might have in place. It can make it look like it was an internally generated email when it wasn't because the email came through your email system or it came from your email servers. And trusted senders, this doesn't happen that often, but if you want to stop it from happening, at the back of this presentation, I provide links to several different tools that will allow you to test your domain for open email relays. It's very easy to do if you don't have your own tools. There's web-based tools that will allow you to do that. And if you download the presentation off of the Blackout website, you can go to the last page and it's got links to those tools. That's not actually the most common mechanism, though. Trusted senders is the most common mechanism I see. Trusted senders are ISPs, internet service providers, hosting providers, like GoDaddy, for instance, right? Where you can go register a domain. The problem with you registering a domain on GoDaddy, if that's where your domain lives and a bad guy wants to leverage it, is all of the emails that come out of the various GoDaddy domains go through their consolidated group or their consolidated set, cluster, farm, however you want to look at it, of email servers. So no matter what domain within their space generated the message, it gets stamped by their email servers going outbound, and so it all looks the same. If you own a domain and you own a domain and you own a domain, you send emails, that first hop out of the email system all looks the same to the recipient. right? So what happens is they'll get, and the other thing is it's generally accepted practice within most email security tools to have what's called trusted senders, because lots of groups use them, lots of legitimate businesses use them. And so places like, and again, I keep saying GoDaddy, there's nothing wrong with GoDaddy. I've actually found them very responsive when there's been security incidents. But I'm just saying they're a common place where we see attackers will set up a domain, or like Vistaprint, they'll set up a domain. And there's some reasons which I'll cover why they use that and how they obfuscate things. But this becomes a problem because you can't block everybody on GoDaddy. You can't block everybody at Microsoft.com. You can't stop everyone who's on Office 365 is using the same set of email server IP ranges, right? You can't just block all of Office 365, and that's the problem that you run into in these shared hosting environments. All right, so here's an example. This is a legitimate example. They went to a lot of trouble to try and get money out of our company. So one of the things they did is they wanted to sound very, bad email. They went to the trouble saying, this is being supervised by the Security and Exchange Commission, so it must be legitimate. A government agency is watching this, so trust it. Don't leak any information. Don't share with anybody, because then somebody might ask questions, and that would be bad. And I need this today, so we don't have time to discuss this and talk about it. What's interesting in this particular account is they then follow up with a second email saying, here's the money we need, and the bank information is going to be provided by a third party. Now, this is really clever for an attacker because this sets up the opportunity for a completely different set of email transactions with different email addresses that no longer have to try and spoof your internal email communications. These were spoofs of an internal email. They were using, in this case, I think it was a chief financial officer. They were spoofing them to start the communication process. But they're going to hand off to Mr. Gordon from Deloitte, right? So now you can start an entirely separate email chain, entirely separate conversation, and you don't have to keep trying to impersonate the domain and get caught at it, right? And what happened is Mr. Gordon called our finance office and said, hey, did you get the email? Here's the information I want to talk to you about. Well, the finance person in our organization had some questions that we run through when people are asking transactions. And he stumbled on those questions. And so they immediately said, okay, I need to put you on hold for a minute while I investigate this. And because of that, and because of our business process, it stopped right there. Right? But this was very interesting the way that they did this because they did a handoff of the email names and who was being involved. So it makes it harder to makes it sound more legitimate, and two, because you can hand off, you quit spoofing, you get less likely you're going to be detected from people identifying a mismatched domain. So this is another good example of data extraction, right? Where someone contacts, in this case, they contacted our HR department, and they said, this was a CEO, he said, we're under audit from the government, and basically the basic body of the message was right here, which was, send me all the W-2s for all of our current employees. And leading into that was another paragraph talking about the fact that we were under a government audit and it was necessary to gather this information. We had to provide it to the auditors. It needed to come from the board of directors rather than from the HR. That's why it was being requested by the CEO. So they had an explanation, right? There's a story. And you can see in cases like this ended up in Bloomberg News, Seagate Technology, our favorite hard drive company, in March of last year, sent all their employees information based on a request just like this. Right? So you might think that people would catch this or be suspicious, but it happens all the time. All right, now another thing we see is people, when we talk about email compromise, if we're going to talk about breach-related compromise, right? How's someone going to get into your system? Endpoint protection is getting better. Now there's lots I came out of the pen testing. I'm probably more technical than the average CISO. I grew up in software analysis and pen testing, and there's very few systems that, given the right time and effort, you can't get into. But it's getting better. It's getting a little harder. right? So some of the ways they're trying to get past things like email defenses are, they know they can't, if you just put the link in the email, that's typically going to get caught as a malicious link. If you embed a malicious document, a lot of standard document formats are getting scanned or outright blocked, right? So most companies won't allow an EXE to be sent to their employees. Most companies will scan Word documents for active macros, those kinds of things, and block. But what we've seen interest lately is this idea of link embedding. And in some cases, they made the embedded link an image file, and then the image file had an embedded link, but they made it look like an attached document, right? So we had a case like this come in. It set off all the alarms, got through our email system at one point, and set off all of our red flags went off when a user clicked on this. And we went back, we're doing the forensic analysis, we're like, how did a zip file get through our system? We don't even allow zip files. Well, so then we figured out, finally, this isn't a zip file. This is a picture of a zip file with a URL link in it, right? So it took us a little bit, because when we first saw this, I was like, that's not possible, right? So this is what people are doing, because it's getting harder. Most email security gateways and other tools are not good at embedded link analysis. So they're good at analyzing a link that's directly in the email. They're pretty good at identifying active content, scripting, or executables. They're not so good at digging down into the embedded URLs. And another vulnerability, I guess I would call it, in some of the tools that do analysis of embedded links is they have link limits, right? So if you make your URL long enough, they quit trying to analyze it. It sounds stupid, but they do. They actually have limits on some of the tools that conduct link analysis. So, talk to your vendor, ask them about it. So how do you stop this, right? Or at least make it harder to be successful? So this is like a lot of attacks. This relies on three different things. It relies on your people, your business process, and your technology. If you can stop this attack with any one of those three things, the whole thing will fall apart. Right? You don't have to do all of these right. Just do one. Just do one of these right all the time, or do a combination of these things right at different times, and you can stop this attack. So we'll take a look at each one. So your people. People are the weak link, right? Because you can't get them to respond consistently. You can't get them to pay attention during your training. They ignore the emails from your security department. And I know that never happens. I know your employees are different. I'm sure that that's true. One of the things I tell people is if it doesn't feel right, contact someone. Contact your security department. Contact your manager. Say, hey, I got this email. I don't know what it is, but this doesn't feel right. It doesn't seem like our normal transaction request that we get from this business partner. Right? Get them comfortable with asking and saying, I don't know why, but this doesn't feel right. Or normally they would send it and they would normally have some other type of, hello, hey, how you doing? Because we interact with them all the time. This was very dry. It didn't seem right. Right? So if it doesn't seem right, ask. Carefully review the from and the to field when replying. So a lot of times, depending on how technical or how dedicated the attacker, sometimes they don't even try. They'll say, in the email body, it'll say, I'm the CEO, please send me money now, right? Maybe a little more complicated than that. But if they look at the to field, it's clearly someone at gmail.com, right? That's not even trying. So if they pay attention, you can catch some of them that way. The other thing you can do is when you hit reply, it may look legitimate in the to field that you got it from, or the from field, but when you hit reply, before they send, especially if it's related to disclosing information or handling financial transactions, carefully look at who the email is going to, because it may be different. Also, here are the three things that your employees should have red flags for. Anything that involves funds transfers, asking for sensitive information, or if they're told it's urgent and needs to be done outside of our normal business process, right? So if you typically have a business process for handling how you're going to transfer funds, how you're going to disclose information, if you get a letter and it says, an email, and it says, this is urgent and we have to skip our normal processes, that warning, danger, right? That's normally a pretty good warning sign. So the other thing is, this is more going back to the compromising of endpoints. never tell your users, maybe install little electrodes that shock them if they try and open up a document and enable the macros. No, bad employee. Don't do that. Also, unusual fund transfers, information requests, previously established contact. If you get a request and it doesn't feel right, don't use the phone number in the email. Don't use the email in the email. If it's a company you do business with, an organization that you do business with, or a government agency, find their phone number, the contact information outside of that email chain, and verify the transaction, right? Verify that this is really something that they're requesting. And finally, for hovering over links, this is like if you don't have link rewriting, so certain tools like Proofpoint, Microsoft's Advanced Exchange Online Protection will allow you to set up link rewriting where they will rewrite a link, and if a user clicks on it, it'll go through a sanitization process to verify that the end site is accurate, assuming there's not too many hops in the end site. But if you don't have that, you can teach users to hover, not click, hover over a link to see where that link's sending them. So the link might say, hey, click me, I'm harmless, but it really goes to www.evilsite.com. Come here for bad stuff, right? Your PC is my PC. Okay. Processes and policies. Make sure that you've got a good policy in place for how you're going to handle financial transactions and information disclosures outside the company, that your business processes, how you go about doing these things, aligns to your policy. So having a policy and then not building a business process which reflects that policy is not very helpful, because when people go to do their jobs, they're not typically going to go, what did the policy say about doing that? What was step 14? I should go look that up. Nobody ever does that, right? But if your day-to-day business process is an incorporation of your policy, so that your process that they do every day reflects that, then when it's outside of the process, they'll understand, they'll see right away, this isn't normal, right? So the other thing is you can test your users, right? So I'm sure that we can find a vendor. I listed a few here. I don't actually have anyone I'm trying to provide as these guys are awesome. I know that there are vendors here that provide this service. But testing your users to ensure that they understand, right? You can give them passing grades. If they open up 2 or 3 of these emails, you can send them back to the training. They get the slap on the hand, or you get the reward, a carrot and stick, however you want to work it. But to help it will help provide data back to your executives. How bad is our company employee base at identifying fraudulent emails versus realistic emails? Because if you can show them that, wow, we're really bad at this, 95% of the people clicked the email that says whatever you do, don't click this, that may help you get some funding for additional user training, right? So this is not just to use it as a way of identifying all the bad users you need to retrain, but you can also use this to help establish where do you need to be funding to get improved performance from a security controls of your users, because people are probably the weakest link. They're also the strongest link we have if they're well informed. And I'll talk about that later. It's another thing. A lot of companies I've worked with have the idea that to tell users that we have a problem is to acknowledge something's wrong with the company, right? So what these companies will do is every time they get a breach, every time they have an email compromise, every time something happens, they're like, no, don't tell anybody. It didn't happen, right? Our users need to feel comfortable and safe. Okay, that's wrong. I'm just telling you right now, it's a bad idea. Because when your users feel safe and they get a fraudulent email, they don't question it. Because why? Because the IT security department is protecting us. They wouldn't let anything bad through, so this must be okay, right? So communicate out to them when emails get through a system. Like maybe you get, hey, 5,000 users got this email. We know this email is problematic. Let them know, right? We communicate very actively with our users so that they know, hey, things get through. We will do everything we can to protect you as a community and as a user base and to protect our company, but this is complicated, and things get through, right? And you can also use your own free phishing tools here. Here's an example of one you can use. Email security gateways. Email security gateways would be something like Proofpoint. Symantec has one. FireEye has one. There's a whole collection of companies that offer email security gateways. They do two things. One is they do generic spam prevention, right? So they're checking for known senders, known bad IPs or URLs that generate spam on a regular basis, and they'll just block those, right? So your email, normally you would get 20 million emails a month, and 19 million of those are, would you like to buy Viagra, right? So they will sort those out so that the ones that get through are less likely to be fraudulent scam emails. Not prevented, but less likely. So that'll filter out like the spam type stuff, the very generic stuff. And then the second thing they do, depending on the email gateway, security gateway you have, is they'll implement additional things. They'll make comparisons within the headers. They'll say, hey, does the from and the reply to actually match? Do the various aspects of the domain. So I'll talk a little bit about SPF, DKIM, and DMARC, which is probably the most misunderstood set of email technologies on the planet. And I would say that 65 or 70% of the articles I've read about these on the internet actually are incorrect. So we'll talk a little bit about that, and I'll give you some resources to go find out more information from good resources that talk about these. But implementing these is challenging, and making them effective as a protection mechanism can be even more challenging. But if all the stars align, and you and your partners all agree to do the same thing, could this technology help you? Sure. Is it really, truly implemented at a level that makes it helpful today? Not so much. Okay. Some providers also offer additional zero-day protection, like Microsoft Advanced Exchange Online Protection. That's different than their standard. Like if you get Office 365, you get Microsoft Online Protection as part of your package. That's their baseline email security gateway. However, you can, for a little extra money, depending on the size of your company, or a lot of extra money, depending on the size of your company, you can sign up for their Advanced Exchange Online Protection, and that offers a couple of important features. Those features compete with Proofpoint's targeted attack protection. I think they were kind of the leader in this space, where they would sandbox emails, and they would actually, so the email might deliver the email, but at the same time they'll sandbox it, and they'll execute the payload and see what happens. The other thing they'll do is they'll do URL rewriting, and the URL rewrite will put the Proofpoint or the Microsoft box in the middle of any link that's embedded in an email. So if you click the link, it'll go to the security gateway system. The security gateway system will follow that link to see where it goes, and does it land on a site that looks to be malicious? Does it try and execute a payload? Is it a known bad site? And if it is, they'll immediately block the email. Similar to what a web security gateway would do. If you had a force point web security gateway, they have some similar characteristics to that, but specifically for email embedded links. And they'll block those for you. So an email security gateway is a very valuable tool. The other thing I would suggest, if your company has the budget for it, is to have more than one security gateway in line, because like a lot of security tools, while they do a similar task, the mechanisms or the details of how they execute that task are different. And so while this tool might block 85% of the stuff, and they're blocking this range, and the next tool blocks 85%, but they're blocking this stuff. So now you've just picked up, like they overlap in some places, but they don't overlap in others. So it's very similar to, if you look at vulnerability analysis tools, a lot of vulnerability analysis tools are similar to that. Okay, so SPF, if you go out and read articles, there are lots of articles on the internet, which is our friend. Nothing on the internet is ever false. We all know that. And lots of things on the internet will tell you that SPF will prevent domain spoofing. Wow, great. I'm going to implement SPF, and nobody will be able to fake my domain ever again. Yay! No, exactly. That's a good reaction, because that's not true. What SPF does is SPF checks the return path, which is a header field that basically says, if this email cannot be delivered for some reason, right? So I delivered it, the email box no longer exists, The return path is where your email server will send notification that says this wasn't deliverable, right? That's all it does. It doesn't prevent them from modifying the from field and faking that. It doesn't modify that. It doesn't keep them from putting a different reply to email address. None of the things are the most commonly manipulated fields that make business email compromise successful. SPF doesn't stop any of those. However, attackers are aware that SPF is in play, and so it's probably one of the most frequently spoofed values outside of what the user sees. Once you get into the email header itself, SPF, the reply to, which is what SPF uses, gets spoofed a lot. And the reason, this goes back to earlier I talked about how attackers will host in shared hosting environments, like GoDaddy or on Microsoft or like Vistaprint or like Google, right? They'll set up an email address there and they'll communicate from that location. The reason that they do that is because let's say GoDaddy is victimized by this a lot, right? What'll happen is they set up a domain. Their domain is going to go through the same Exchange server as somebody else's. So what they'll do is they'll go out on GoDaddy and they'll find a parked domain. Does everyone know what a parked domain is? A domain that's been set up by somebody. Maybe they set it up a few years ago. You can go on Whois. You can see how long the domain's been alive. And they either took their site down or they never set it up or whatever. But it's still there. It's registered. It's live. It's active on GoDaddy. But if you go to the site, there's really nothing there, right? Nothing going on, obvious anyway. So what they'll do is they'll find these inactive sites. And in the return path, they'll list the inactive site. So if they send an email out and they do an SPF check, they sent it from somewhere else within GoDaddy. But the SPF check will say, well, did this come from GoDaddy? And it'll say yes. And if you decide you want to investigate further later, you can't really tell because GoDaddy obfuscates what happens behind the scenes. You can't tell what domain actually generated that email, right? All you can see is that it hit the GoDaddy email servers, and that's as far as a forensic analysis of an email header can take you, right? After that, you're on the phone with GoDaddy saying, hey, this looked like a problem. I need your help in figuring out what happened. And they will be responsive. They've got a responsive security team. But because of this, the fact that all the domains share, and this is true, I keep saying GoDaddy, but there are lots of other hosting providers. I'm just trying to stick with not having to have 57 names in my head. All of them will use a single email set of servers to send out emails from the thousands of domains that they have. And so one of the ways the attackers will try and throw people off is they'll change the return path to another domain that's in that same co-hosted environment. So that throws off your forensic investigation later if you want to figure out what really went on. DKIM is a little different. DKIM is a digital signing of an email message. It verifies the originating source of the domain. But again, what it's verifying is the sending domain based on what the email server sees, not what the end user sees. So there's a set of headers. If you look at a set of headers within an email, they're very long, and you can see every server that handed off to every other server, what their IP was, what their domain was, what the process they went through. So what happens is in that set of stuff, they do a verification, and they basically do a signature that's a hashed, encrypted hash signature that says, here, I'm digitally signing this email is coming from my domain. They have a public-private key set up. But what it doesn't do is it doesn't protect what the user sees, right? So you can still spoof the from address. You can still spoof the reply to. And it depends. I guess I should say it depends. They can digitally sign different aspects of the message, right? And DKIM, I would say, is probably one of the most complicated email technologies to implement. And when people do implement it, a lot of times they do it in a very soft way. So even though you could do some things with DKIM that might help with fraud prevention, most places don't implement it that way. And very few places have implemented it at all, which is another problem, right? So if you're trying to set up a hard check that says, hey, if somebody fails a DKIM check, I'm going to reject the email, well, that would be like 90% of the internet does not have DKIM set up, right? So you're blocking everybody's email because they fail because they don't have one. And you could set up some other rules, like if they don't have one, let it through, but if they do have one, it fails. Anyway, so it gets complicated. DMARC, if you implement DMARC, which requires SPF and DKIM, DMARC actually by default does a verification of the from address. It matches the from address to the DKIM record, it matches the from address and the return path, so it covers all the bases, and it legitimately can stop spoofing of your company. Again, it requires all of these other steps. And one of the other problems that we ran into in implementing this is a lot of your business partners will either not have this implemented or will have it implemented incorrectly, right? So once you create, these are all DNS records, basically, or based on DNS records. What that means is you've got to keep them up to date, right? So you stood up a new server, you allocated a new IP for it, and it joined your server farm for sending email. You didn't update your DNS record for your SPF or your DKIM, and now it's getting blocked because it's IP-based check, and the IPs don't line up, and so now you're blocking your legitimate customer's email, and that's when you get a call from the CEO that says, hey, my buddy over at this other company just called me and says he's been trying to reach me for a week, and I don't have any emails from him. What's going on? That's not a call you want to have. Trust me. I mean, I'm not saying I got that call. Okay, maybe I got that call. So it's just not a call you want to have. So when you're doing this, you have to be very careful. So one of the things you can do is instead of setting up a failure to go to just block period, you might have failures go to a security box where you have somebody who's monitoring those and checking, looking for anything that looks like, hey, maybe we should make sure we forward this on before somebody calls us. All right. Another thing you can do is it's very simple within most email security gateways or even within the Exchange system to add a label to the subject line that identifies emails that came from outside your company, right? Now this is just kind of a heads up for your users. You didn't block the email. This will not completely idiot-proof your email. There are still people who will see external and pretend it doesn't exist and just respond to the email, right? But this makes it a little easier to help them try and see that this is an email that, even though it says it came from CEO at ourcompany.com, well, if it did, it probably wouldn't have that on there, right? So you teach them that. It's not that hard to do. One of the things you will have to do is you'll have to set up some rules within your Exchange system or within your security gateway that strip it out so you don't end up with external, external, external because you replied back and forth with somebody like 3 or 4 times. So you want to be able to strip those things out, outgoing, so that it doesn't keep showing up over and over. I've seen that happen with people trying to implement this and they don't put the stripping rule, and so every time your email comes back, it adds an additional one. And pretty soon the only thing you see in the subject line is a bunch of externals. I don't even know what this email is about. Right? So, okay. Email security gateways. The other thing you can do is you can blacklist, and this is something you can do in Exchange. And if you download this presentation, in the backup slides, I walk you through how in the current versions of Exchange, if Exchange is your edge server, right? If that's what's on the edge delivering email for you, or you might have a security gateway that's your edge system, whichever it is, I walk you through both for Office 365 and Exchange 2013, 2016, I'll walk you through what the rules are that allow you to blacklist a domain. So if somebody's coming from the internet and they're pretending to spoof your users in the from field, it says CEO at yourcompany.com, you can set up rules that say, hey, I'm blacklisting my own domain. If you came from the internet and the from field says it's coming from my internal domain, I'm just going to refuse to deliver it, right? Now the word of caution when doing this is communicate to all of the business departments in your company and find out who they've authorized to send on their behalf. Because lots of benefits providers, company insurance, health programs, employee benefits, a lot of those groups have been delegated authority. They'll send as if they're your HR department or your finance department, but the email is being generated from on the internet. So what you have to do is you want to ask all those questions about, okay, who has email sending for us, right? You also have to look for things like print servers, like you got a remote office and they've got a print server, and that print server can send email, and so it generates its own little like email service and goes out. Have you whitelisted that? The other thing is, once you've done asking your questions, kind of built what you think your whitelist is, then you implement it with a no-fail but an alert for like a month or more, so that you can see all the stuff you missed, because there'll be a bunch, right? There'll be a bunch of emails coming in from your domain, and you have to weed through them and start saying, okay, is this legitimate? Is this not legitimate? It'll take you a while to get down to a list of truly authorized senders for your domain. But once you do, you can implement a blacklist that says, we're going to blacklist all these people if they're coming from the internet. It's kind of a whitelist blacklist combination, but you blacklist them. If it's stuff that is generated inside your network, you blacklist it. If it's stuff that's outside your network, you whitelist it, saying, okay, we know that these are allowed to come in impersonating our domain, you whitelist it. So it's a kind of a combination. And create the exceptions, right? Okay. Deleting Exchange Management Shell. Exchange Management Shell is a very powerful tool. So let's assume bad emails are going to get through, right? I'm pretty sure they will. So when they do get through, do you have a process? Is your security team and your Exchange team well integrated so that, let's say 5,000 emails got through to your users. You know that these emails are not just spam, they're malicious. They're carrying a malicious link, a malicious payload, for whatever reason it got past your defenses, right? Well, you can call or email every user saying, please delete that, right? Which is going to be hard to do, and they probably won't pay attention anyway if they answer the phone or if they read your email. So what we do is we do notify users. We send them a follow-on email, but the other thing we immediately do is we immediately engage our Exchange incident response team. And we've established the processes for how we identify that email in the system. And it's not like a simple query, because you think, okay, I'm going to look for the subject line. Well, what if they used a subject line that commonly occurs in your business? Okay, well, I'm going to use a sender. What if they impersonated a sender? It's not as easy as you think it is. You typically have to do a set of queries that get you to the right list, but then you can mass delete them. A lot of times they're gone out of people's email box before they ever had a chance to be exposed. In the back of this presentation slide, I walk you through how to do this. Okay, last, report it. If you have an event, report it. It's important for a couple of reasons. One, it gives you a chance to potentially get your money back, right? So contact your financial institution, have them contact the financial institution where the money went. If you can do it fast enough before the money's withdrawn, you might get it back. So that's one thing. Two, if you report the loss to whatever government agency in whichever country you're operating in, they'll keep track of this. So maybe your loss isn't big enough to make a case, or they don't have enough information. But maybe your loss, your loss, your loss, and your loss, which all have indicators back to the same perpetrator, do make a case. And then they can go after somebody.Maybe they can get your money back, and maybe it's just the person ends up in jail, right? So it's important to report it if you want to have a chance of getting your money back, and two, if you want to keep other people from being a victim. And that's it. So thank you very much. Yes. And I'm running pretty low on time, but I will be around afterwards. I'm happy to answer questions for anybody. And also, if you're interested in email header analysis, which I don't cover here, but gives you a lot of other information, I've got a whole other presentation I'm happy to share with you. If you tell me you want it, I'll send it to you, or I'll send you a link to where you can get it. Hopefully, it's a Black Hat presentation. I think they've posted it. So I guess I should verify, but I think I can share it with you. All right. Anyhow, yes? Yeah. So if you're, that's a problem for email security gateways, right? Because the email security gateways have to do a certain number of hops. Like basically creates an extra hop in the process. So it really depends on the security gateway you're using. How far does it go? Does it just go to that URL, or will it follow it? Will it follow forwards? Right? So that becomes a problem. Like what happens is an attacker will compromise a domain somewhere, and they'll set up a forwarder. So you'll get a link to a somewhat innocuous domain which isn't hosting anything malicious, but they've compromised that domain, at least compromised the web server enough to set up a forwarder, and the forwarder will send them on to the malicious domain. So some email security gateways will account for that and will follow a certain number of hops. They all have a limit, though, on how far they'll go. But we've seen several cases of that particular thing where basically they use either a URL shortener or they used a compromised website with a forwarder to try and get past this. So those are things to be aware of, and you need to have a conversation with your tool provider and say, okay, if we have this situation, how do you guys account for this?